You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Welcome back, everyone, to Arsenal Pass, episode 22. I'm Brendan Patrick, joined always by calling champion Hayden Dale. Hayden, how are you doing?
Good, thanks, Brendan. How are you?
Good. So today we're doing a sort of Monarch recap, looking back at the Road to Nationals data from the past 6 weeks, reflecting on the season as a whole, and giving our initial thoughts on construction moving forward with the release of Tales of Aria. Anyway, Hayden, before we get into that, as always, how was your week in Flesh and Blood?
Yep, good week in Flesh and Blood. Finally got to play 2 Road to Nationals, which was awesome. 2 online Road to Nationals on the Saturday and the Sunday. Managed to win one on Sunday, which was awesome. Piloting the, our chain deck that we've had for most of the season. Sort of first time actually playing it properly. The week leading up to it, I probably played the most games I played with it. And testing, I haven't really been playing it. So that was good. Saturday was interesting. The first one, I had bubbled out at 9th on day one. So I felt like I had to really redeem myself on Sunday and managed to take it. It was good. They're both sort of over 50 player events. There was in Australia. There was actually each day there was 2 online Road to Nationals because the stores that had yet to run this just had to get them done in the last weekend. So there was a lot of events happening in Australia, which was cool to see. So 4 more Road to Nationals winners, a few more people got their invites, and now we're just looking to find out when Nationals will be. But no, good week overall. Bit of testing as well, of course, with yourself and Dante heading to Vegas this coming weekend. And yeah, that's kind of been it for me. What about yourself, Brendan?
Not much. So
No
my notes here were big chill. So I actually finally didn't have a Road to National event. So I had 5 weeks of it, 5 weekends. Most of which of them I was traveling for. So it was nice to kind of finally have a weekend off. Obviously there's kind of a silver lining there, or not a silver lining, but there's fine print in the sense that I do have the Calling Vegas coming up here very, very soon. So we have been testing and just kind of preparing. We're not really kind of slamming the testing. I think that we've spaced it out enough over the past few months to where I'm comfortable. I don't feel like I kind of have to prepare last minute, and we're keeping things relatively chill, sometimes pretty high level, making sure we understand our theory, understand our deck and the sideboard completely, and less more like kind of game to game micro play. So yeah, it's interesting. And I'm just really excited for Vegas here. I'm excited to finally meet Dante. I'm going to fly into Vegas Thursday afternoon. He's going to be sitting there waiting for me, waiting to pick me up at my hotel. And then, I'll show him around. He's never been to Vegas, so that'll be interesting. I don't think Dante has really been out of Canada, like, ever. Maybe once or twice. So Vegas is definitely going to be a shock. It's a weird place.
Awesome.
All right, Hayden, take us into the news.
Yeah, I mean, we can't go far without week 2 of spoilers as kind of, I think, titling any sort of news headlines right now for Flesh and Blood, it's been such a every preview season that comes around. I mean, it's just get so excited. The release schedule from whether it be content creators, or we've got some stores getting cards, or whoever it might be that's releasing cards. It's kind of like like who's up next? What are we seeing? When are we seeing the new hero? When are we seeing Briar? So it's been another good week of releases. I think by the time this drops, we're going to see a big chunk of cards. But then over the weekend of Vegas, I mean, we're basically guaranteed to see everything, right? We're going to have 500 or whatever people opening the set, playing sealed. I think by the end of the weekend, if not the official card gallery, because they might not be putting it up in the official card gallery, but if you're on the Discord or you're on Reddit or somewhere, you're going to see all of the cards from the set, no doubt. So heading into pre-release next weekend, there's definitely going to be a lot of information out there in terms of walking in with ready to tackle the limited format, which is cool. In terms of what we've got going on as well, just wanted to share that. So we have our limited set review coming out next week, so that'll be at the usual time that the pod drops. So it still gives you if not, we'll try and get it out earlier actually to give people as much time as possible. With our set review, these are longer episodes, and heading to the pre-release, I'm sure people might want to break those up over a couple of listens before they head to the pre-release. As well, I just want to share our release schedule did change 2 weeks ago, just shifted to a bit more of a more formulaic. I guess it's a bit more of a set time for us now in terms of when things come out. So the podcast still comes out at the same time, which is Central, or CST, sorry, that's Thursday at 8 p.m, which is Friday 11 a.m. Sydney time, or 1 p.m. if you're in New Zealand. A Time the Round now comes out on Saturday morning at 11 a.m. CST, and the gameplay now drops at Tuesdays at 10 a.m. So just wanted to share our release schedule in case you are looking for our videos, thinking maybe something's meant to be already up and it's not quite. That would be why. Next thing, Vegas this weekend. Of course, Brennan, you just spoke about it. You're obviously off to go. I will be sat here and I'll be watching the stream. I'll be glued to it all weekend. So if you are at a loss or a loose end this weekend, you want to watch some Flesh and Blood, you want to watch some Constructed. I think this is going to be the first time we're going to have Classic Constructed actually streamed. A big event outside of maybe Road to Nationals, things like that. We're gonna have the stream to watch. So come join me in the stream. I'll be in there watching what's happening. Probably have to have a bit of a weird sleep schedule this weekend, but I definitely want to make sure I watch as much of it as possible. I'm very excited to see what this the last weekend of Monarch Classic Constructed has in store for us.
And I want to mention, we recently had on our YouTube channel, we had a Bolton Saber video go up, mostly detailing how the combo works and most importantly, how to beat it after that. So go check that out, especially if you're playing in Vegas. I can't recommend enough that you make sure you understand what that deck is trying to do, and you understand the few little tips that you need to employ to give yourself the best chance of playing against it. I think that this is, without a doubt, the perceived quote-unquote dark horse of the format. It's been winning a lot over in Europe. People have seen that. They've seen the results. And they think they'll be, kind of bring in a cheeky deck if they bring that, and they'll be able to squeeze out some wins. So I expect it to be very, very represented, actually. Probably maybe the second most popular deck after Chain. If not that, definitely third or fourth. So really important that you're prepared for Saber Bolton. Like I said, it is a combo deck, so it's just important to understand what they're doing, where the game state is, and ultimately you'll be able to kind of definitely increase your chances of beating it after that. Anyway, huge shout out and thank you to all of our 120 plus patrons right now. It's been an incredible journey since we've started, and it's helped so much for the podcast to be able to get an editor on. And Hayden has got a reasonable life schedule now. He's actually getting, a few hours of sleep per night. So that's very good. I know he is also very thankful. So again, a million thanks. And, we're going to keep trying to pump out good content for you guys. So we do have another Patreon kind of exclusive topic pod coming out very soon, post Monarch. I'm still definitely considering what that will be. Maybe it'll be based on the Chain deck. Who knows? Just depends what everybody's going to be interested in. I know that we're keen to kind of detail everything we know about Chain, all the internal testing, initial thoughts, initial deck builds, and how we kind of stayed on that deck for a long time, the theory behind it. So maybe that will be the be the format for it. Also want to shout out that we have secured kind of our playmat production. A lot of people have been asking us for a long time. So we finally been able to get that done. Should have them arriving here in Texas in the next 2 weeks. And yeah, they are the Arsenal playmats that you've kind of seen before in some of our videos, or maybe you've seen them in person. They're very, very similar to the Legendary Studios playmats. They're the same thickness, kind of the same feel. And we'll be selling them through our Patreon. So going to start out just Patreon exclusive, probably stay with that for quite a long time. And yeah, I think it'll be like $19.99 for a playmat and maybe like $5 shipping in the US, and international we're still got to figure out. But yeah, if you're interested in a playmat, check it out. It'll be on Patreon. Doesn't matter what tier you're on. We will, it'll be open to everybody on there.
Yeah, and these playmats actually, so it did take us a while to sort these out. I know people have been asking. We had a couple of samples which you would have seen myself and Brendan playing with on, whether it be videos or wherever it might be. We were just been quite happy with these in terms of like the quality, but this one that we finally got done, we think is really good quality. I mean, I haven't seen the physical sample, Brendan's got it, but every time I see it in his camera whenever we're playing games, I guess the coloration looks so good. So I'm glad that we waited and found these. I think these are gonna look great.
Awesome.
Cool. Moving on. Did already mention our upcoming set review. Just want to say, in terms of what that looks like, if people haven't seen our Monarch set review that we did, that's, we review commons and rares. We take out, give our first takes on their strengths, weaknesses, the format, the mechanics in those cards. And of course, we give our grade to the cards. So that'll be up, by this time next week. No Command and Cookout this week, Brendan. We're going to go back to some more spoiler discussion. But, post Tales of Aria, we'll be back with with listener questions. So I want to dive straight in and start talking about some of the questions. Some of the cards. If you do have questions that you do want to submit for a future Commander Cookout, you can send those to arsenalpassfab@gmail.com. Brennan, we've got to start. I think we're just going to talk about Briar to start with. I mean, over the past few weeks, we've talked about Old Time a bit. We've talked about Lexi. This is the week, I guess, our last sort of discussion before we get to our set review and then the pre-release and release. I think we've got to talk about Briar, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I know that a lot of people like Runeblade was definitely surprising as the last class. Very interesting. This Runeblade though to me looks very, very different from Viscerai and Chain, which I guess goes without saying. But I think that even though we're getting another Runeblade, it's going to shake up the game quite a bit, and will feel vastly different from what we're currently playing with.
Yeah, one of the things you asked me this as well, Brendan. Like, you're like, this is the last class I was expecting, and my response was, I am surprised, but I'm not shocked. Like, it's not the last class I was expecting, and that's because I truly think that Runeblade is a pretty marquee class for Legend Story Studios and for Flesh and Blood in terms of what they do. They put a lot of time and effort into the lore of the Runeblades. You can see that they're very much, I guess, of one with the land of Wraith, and so I wasn't surprised. I guess in the end, I was a little surprised. I did still think it was going to be, a shaman or shapeshifter or whatever it might be. But to have this end up being a Runeblade, I don't think is actually that crazy. And I think, like you say, like it is a pretty different approach in terms of the way the core mechanics. I think in the way that the class plays and feels will of course have its similarities. But so much of, I guess, what is happening in the cards we've seen so far has those differences, whether that be for what we see like in limited play. I think that's quite vastly different, actually, but even to constructed play, of course, as well. So I'm really excited to play with Briar. I'm excited by these, like the tokens we've seen as well, the embodiment of Earth, the embodiment of Lightning. I think these are really cool effects, like embodiment of Earth in particular. To have an effect that impacts the defensive side is something that we haven't really seen as much. You have cards like Forge for War, things like that we've seen in the past, but to have this token that actively means that when you're playing the game, you need to be thinking 2 to 3 turns ahead. You have to be thinking almost a full turn cycle ahead, because what you think your opponent, say you're playing against an elemental Runeblade, you're playing against Briar, what they do on their following turn is actually going to heavily impact what you do on your subsequent turn. So now not only are you thinking about the turn cycle, but I think you need to think more about the second turn cycle, the turn cycle preceding that. So after that. So it's really, it's interesting. I'm excited to play Briar in limited, and excited to look at it in constructed as well. Anything else you want to say about Briar before we look at some of these cards, though?
I want to just quickly read off Briar's kind of hero text here, because it's important. I don't know, for me, it's important to like really just laser it in your mind, because like it is slightly complex initially. So we have Briar, Warden of Thorns, Essence of Earth and Lightning. So you may have Earth and Lightning cards in your deck. 40 health, 4 intellect, standard stuff, and it says whenever an attack action card you control deals damage to an opposing hero, create an embodiment of Earth token. Whenever you play your second non-attack action card each turn, create an embodiment of Lightning token. So quickly, let's talk about the tokens as well. So embodiment of Earth, this is the attack action. When it hits, going to create this. Embodiment of Earth says non-attack action cards you control have +1 while defending. At the beginning of your action phase, destroy embodiment of Earth. So really interesting. And then quickly, I'm going to go to Lightning before we kind of talk about that as well. So embodiment of Lightning, this is the 2 non-attack actions. When you and this is both these are auras, by the way. So it says when you play an attack action card, destroy embodiment of Lightning, and the attack gains go again. Hayden, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, the embodiment of Earth token kind of gets me the most excited. Obviously, Go Again, playing with a lot of Go Again is just sort of Flesh and Blood's bread and butter for these past few months. But the idea of getting more defensive value on my non-attack actions, which are particularly, most of the time in my case, my block 2s, gets me pretty excited.
Yeah, it just gives me the feeling that one of the things I was a bit worried about with Briar, especially when we saw some of the cards initially come out, and we'd seen the Earth token, but even if I set Embodiment of Earth to the side and looked at Embodiment of Lightning and some of the cards, one of the things I was worried about was just how this interacts with the especially the ice cards in the set, frost tokens in particular. And I think Embodiment of Earth allows you to play a less linear game, which I think is kind of my overall takeaway from so far what we've seen with this set, is that a lot of the classes I think are going to be a bit more in sort of the middle to even, defensive, or in Briar's case, I think it could be a bit more aggressive. But they're not as linear as maybe I felt that some of them were in Monarch. And when I say linear, I don't mean that in a bad context for Monarch in terms of that they were just like, one style and that's how you had to play it. But the cards that we had, the abilities that we had were very synergistic for, I think, one style of play. Whereas I think with Embodiment of Earth, that actually kind of takes that and flips it a little bit. And of course, just the way that we are going to see ice interact. I think all three of the elements interact really interestingly together as well. So I really like, what Embodiment of Lightning is doing as well in terms of, it feels a bit more like you say stock standard, but I think it's important to have these two that balance off. There's requirements to fulfill them, so you do need to be structuring your turns. Your deck needs to be structured in a way that allows you to get the most out of these. But then there's these effects that give you, pretty solid buffs as well. And yeah, you just need to work out the best ways to use them.
Yeah, I would say at face value, obviously, it's kind of a tangent, but this limited set is, for me, I think at first glance has been the most complicated. There's just like, when I look at the set, I look at these spoilers that are coming out, there's like so many interactions that are going on, mostly because both heroes kind of deal with this sort of, dual essence or dual talent system, whatever you want to call. And they're both complementary and usually kind of polar at the same time. So like what archetypes will be born out of that is definitely sort of hard to grasp the scope of what's going on when you're just looking at these spoilers card to card.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that's going to be something that we really start to look at next week when we dive into the limited format. We do our set review, of course, as well as that. How do these cards play out into certain different archetypes for each of the heroes? So, immediately one of the first things that comes up for me is that each of these classes obviously have, it feels like, two pretty separate impacts of what the elements can do, depending on if there's more earth in the deck or there's more lightning. If we're using Briar as an example, you can already see this, I think, with what's happening with Lexi, depending on whether that's more of you could have more of a lightning build versus more of a ice build with Lexi. I think pretty easily the way that the non-denominational element cards interact, so just your base element cards, which kind of feel, these are basically your generics in the set, the elemental cards. So yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic, and I think once we see all of the cards, it's going to be a lot clearer about exactly what their kind of place is, because we haven't seen many generics so far. Have we seen any? Actually, I need to go and have a look. Very, very few, if any. It feels like the elemental cards are the kind of generics for the set, so they're also going to interact in interesting ways, because most of those cards have effects on them, whether it be fuse, whether it be certain other things.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Yeah, do you have any kind of thoughts on Briar? Because kind of any parting thoughts. Sorry, but I do want to talk about these. Speaking of slightly generic, let's talk class generic. I want to talk about these Runeblade boots, because this got me really fascinated. Because if you talk about Runeblade as a class, like, got a really solid chest, got two solid chests. We got Skellata and Husk, both some of the best pieces of armor in the game, in my opinion. We've got the Grasp, amazing. And then in terms of hood, we usually run Arcanite Skullcap, but we also have kind of Dichotomy up there. So we definitely have some choices. But now in the boots option, we have this Sutcliffe's Suede Hides. What's your opinion on that card so far?
Yeah, well, I mean, we have two options, right? We can talk about.
Yeah, there's
the legendary as well.
Start with the common.
Yeah, we'll start with the common.
Small.
Yeah. Really interesting. Like, when I saw this card, I think it feels to me that once I saw Briar, this made a bit more sense in terms of where this would see play in limited, in terms of you break it, you give your attack action card go again, and then you can play a non-attack action and fulfill your requirements. So you go, like, you have to have played a non-attack action to break Cyclops Suede Hides to get the go again. So, but you can play non-attack action, non-attack action, and get some of your effects. So yeah, I mean, it feels like it's probably going to be more so a limited card, I think, because it gives the attack action card go again. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I see it. I think I'm probably more interested in what the legendary boots can do, to be honest.
So before we get into legendary boots, I think, just as like a sort of pairing with this, I've seen there's been so much just instant speed interaction in this set, and specifically in Runeblade, we're seeing a lot more instant speed interaction. We did previously have, Rattlebones, and I think is Skellata instant speed interaction as well. I believe it is.
Yeah, it must be. I think it might be.
Yeah, it is. I believe so. Well,
okay,
don't take my word for it, because I am notorious for just saying the absolute opposite thing. But yeah, I mean, we're seeing so many. I mean, this is kind of across all of the classes in Tales of Aria, but Runeblade specifically has definitely piqued my interest. Like, it seems like kind of a more instant heavy class in general. Now we see all these cards being expanded in the card pool.
Yeah, and it is instant speed. I just fact checked you just in case.
See, I've never been wrong, right?
Never. Yeah, I mean, the interaction is really cool. Even what we were about to talk about, the legendary, that's instant as well. We've seen some. Yeah, we're going to see some really interesting potential interactions at instant speed with Runeblade in Constructed, I think, as well, with cards that we've seen previously because of the way that Spellbound Creepers works. If we want to talk about that.
Yeah, let me go ahead and read it just so we're all on the same page, because there is a mouthful on this card. So, Spellbound Creepers. You've got legendary Runeblade equipment legs with 1 defense. And it says once per turn instant, 1 resource. Put a bind counter on Spellbound Creepers. You may play your next non-attack action card this turn as though it were an instant. Activate this ability only if you have attacked or defended with an attack action card this turn. And then its secondary set of text is, at the beginning of your end phase, destroy Spellbound Creepers unless you have dealt arcane damage this turn equal or greater to the number of bind counters on Spellbound Creepers. And this equipment has Blade Break.
For 1. Yeah, it's... there's a lot going on here. I think my first initial reaction to this card was, I'm excited. I have something for Viserai to set up a more mid-rangey, sort of maybe even aggressive Viserai. Because one of my kind of first impacts with like Frost tokens, my first initial thing was like, wow, like Viserai can just ignore these to an extent with like additional costs, right? With
the discounts.
Yeah, with the discounts off Rune Chance. With I've just forgotten the keyword. They just reduce. I don't think they have a keyword, right? It just reduces the cost for each rune chant.
Yeah, I was going to say, what keyword are we talking about?
Yeah, and so Spellbound Creepers, allowing you to play things, like see, now I'm just blanking on cards. The one that creates 3 rune chants at red.
Juice.
Reduce. No, that's the defense reaction. See.
No, it's Read the runes.
Read the runes, thank you. So you play Read the Runes, Spellbound Creepers, you then get to play your attack that's discounted, you get to keep having your turn. I mean, I think it's... Yeah, I mean, this card, that's my initial thing, but I think there's just a lot of interactions, like you can Sonata at instant speed. Like, you can kill your opponent on their turn when they've dumped their whole hand and then Sonata them for... 16 damage or whatever, and kill them that way. So there's a lot of different things that are happening with Spellbound Creepers, and obviously like a pretty big, drawback. Like there's only so many times you can be able to do this because of the cost effect on it, right? But I mean, it's a powerful effect. I think it needs to have this ability. It's interesting in terms of like from a flavor perspective, like what Spellbound Creepers means for Aria as well. Like it feels like they're from the Demonastery, right? It doesn't feel like they're from Aria, even in the especially in the artwork, but even just in the way that the card works. So yeah, interesting to see like where these kind of come from.
Yeah, I don't know the exact text off the top of my head for Sonata Arcanix, but how annoying is it to Sonata Arcanix your opponent on their turn after they've kind of blown their whole entire hand?
Yeah, I mean, it might be a bit niche because you probably wanted to pop your rune chance and kill them anyway, but you could just get in you could potentially be getting in free damage and finding cards to defend with as well with Sonata, which is really interesting. So you could make it an instant speed with Spellbound Creepers, find cards to block with, and then still have your big turn on your turn as well. So it's interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely a really, really cool card, and I'm loving the instant speed interaction at Runeblade. It's kind of, I didn't get the wizard that I was looking for this set, but I'm getting a taste. I want to talk about probably one of my favorite limited cards of all time. I think already.
What a call!
And that's gonna be it's gonna be Deep Blue. So this is a generic equipment chest, block for 0, and it says action. Put a card from your hand on the bottom of your deck, destroy Deep Blue, gain 3 resources, go again. So this is so good for so many reasons, and my favorite reason is probably one that doesn't come to mind immediately. So a lot of people will see this and they'll think, okay, I get to put my red on the bottom of my deck and gain 3 resources like it was a blue. That's really good. Gaining the 3 resources, turning your red into a blue, that's awesome. But you know what else is awesome? Putting a red on the bottom of your deck and still, you're still able to kind of play out your turn. So if we talk about limited, we're almost always seeing our second cycle of our deck. In slower formats, we'll see our third cycle as well. To be able to, putting a red at the bottom of the deck would usually be a cost that you'd be paying, right? Like, okay, I'm not going to play my most optimized hand out here in the first cycle of the deck because I want to make sure I have threats down in my second cycle. Make sure I'm drawing a hand that has actual threats in the late game, not just drawing 4 blues. This lets you do that for a very, very decent deal. And that's going to be really exciting. There's also the sink below effect, right? So if you're able to tuck this, your opponent doesn't know what it is, and you can hide key tech cards. So if we talk about something like Welcome to Wraith, you could sink below down pummels, you could sink below down all kinds of funny stuff that your opponent would, if your opponent was tracking your pitch, this would actively be something very hard for them to play around. It was like a whole nother mind game that was just, you kind of had to think about as you were playing that second cycle if they played sink belows, throughout the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. It's one of the funniest things is that the 2 cards I think that I've been probably most excited about, or 2 of the cards, there's a lot of cards that have been exciting for me, but 2 of the cards that have been most exciting for me have been Deep Blue and Frostfang, which are probably purely limited cards, but I think just the design of them, the way I think they're going to interact with limited, the ways that you get to play these cards and construct turns around them, I think is it makes me really excited to dive in and play this limited format. And Deep Blue also has I really like the art. It's such a cool flavor as well. I don't know. It's just a really cool card. So I'm excited.
I have a little fun fact too.
Yeah,
so
please.
Deep Blue was actually the name of the first computer that they built to try to beat the Grandmaster in chess, like Kasparov. You probably know this because I think this you're into this.
It's
stuff.
cool.
The name of IBM's computer was called Deep Blue. And yeah, I think it eventually won. I watched the whole documentary. It's just funny when I think about it. I wonder if that's the reference. Just because it's a pretty iconic name, obviously, at this point. The first kind of supercomputer that could beat the Grandmasters in chess.
It's cool. I like it. A couple of other last cards, I think, Brennan. I think we can't go past Crown of Seeds. We've finally seen the Earth Legendary Equipment, which is a headpiece, which says, once per turn instant, 1 resource, put a face-down card from your arsenal on the bottom of your deck, draw a card, and prevent the next 1 damage that would be dealt to your hero this turn. Really interesting card. Being able to trade, a resource and replace a potential arsenal card that you don't want, to sort of roll the dice a little bit. And not only, but that puts that card into your hand as well. So you can actually turn that card into a defensive card. So, trading a resource to do it, which, could be off something like a Tunic. It could be, because we're looking at Earth here, this could be something for Old Time as well, where you pitch a blue, pay 1 for Crown, turn your arsenal into a defensive card or into, a better card. And then also just play Staunch Response or something. Yeah, exactly.
That's
so
the first thing that comes to mind.
Card has a lot of design space around it, I think, and really interesting. The fact this also blocks for 0. I'm just interested to see what this will do, I guess, for Briar as well. What does this mean for Briar? What does this mean for Old Time? So far, I think a lot of the cards we've seen, it's not immediately clear what this does, but the effect is definitely a powerful one.
All right, Hayden, I want to close off with what, I've been hearing the shouts of the people. They printed Dawnblade for the Runeblade hero. No, I'm just kidding. There's quite a reaction to this card initially, but Duskblade, very interesting card. I'm actually very excited about it. Looks fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and read it off because this is another kind of a mouthful and it's a bit complicated. So it's a Runeblade weapon, sword, 2-hander. It attacks for 2. Obviously have 0 defense, is majestic. So it says once per turn action, attack for 1 resource. When you attack with Duskblade, if you have played an attack action card and a non-attack action card this turn, put a +1 counter on Duskblade. At the beginning of your end phase, if you haven't played an attack action card and a non-attack action card this turn, remove all +1 counters from Duskblade. So Hayden, this looks ridiculous, first of all. Looks very good initially, but it's coming out in a set where we're going to have to deal with taxes, hand disruption, all of this kind of funky stuff. So if I'm looking at Duskblade in the vacuum of Monarch, like the set we're playing right now, card looks fantastic, looks amazing. Looks like it would immediately make my deck, right?
Yeah,
in the context, in the context of Tales of Aria, maybe less so. Still very good card, but there's a lot of stuff in the set that's going to help deal with this.
Yeah, I mean, this is like the ultimate tempo card, right? The ultimate tempo weapon. You think about Dawnblade being the ultimate tempo weapon, but if you're able to block out Dawnblade, you get to stall the tempo. There's no way to interact with this from a purely, if your opponent doesn't want you to, right? If you think about it in the context of, like you said, previous sets, you'd be like, well, if I can maybe get them with the CNC or I force them with like a crippling crush, then they'll have to block and they'd lose tempo. But the defense reaction and blocking out's not going to do it. But in this format, where, like you just already said it, we have Frostbite tokens, we have hand disruption. This feels like it's going to be a bit less impressive. I still think the card is very good. We're going to see this card do a lot of work. It looks very good in Briar. but doesn't look to quite the extent that maybe it would have been. I think if there's no way this card would have ever been able to be printed in Monarch, for instance. It would have just been too strong. One
Sure.
resource to effectively, you probably keep those counters pretty easily. Given the format we set in, I think this actually, if anything, this indicates to me even more that the format we're about to enter into is not going to be a friendly place to something like Duskblade.
I know. That's what's funny. Is like we're definitely not saying that the card isn't good, because the card is really freaking good.
Yeah.
It's just also being printed alongside the Frost talent system, which makes this card harder to kind of. Yeah, sorry, the ice system.
Yeah.
And it makes this card harder to kind of do its thing. Like if it was able to run rampant in any other format prior to this, yes, I would see this card and I would immediately be like, okay, starting week 0, we're building a deck based around this card. But now, while it is still very, very good, it doesn't look as warping as it would be in a a less hand disruption taxing format.
Yeah, agree. All right, Brendan. Well, we could sit here and probably talk about these spoilers for days. But we will, of course, as we said, go through all the commons and rares next week in our set review, and we'll probably maybe in time in the round, depending on what we have, if we have time for, we will look at some of these Majestics as well in a bit more detail. But of course, as we move through the season, as we move into Tales of Aria, there's going to be a lot of time for us to talk about some of these cards and the way they might impact Constructed. And once we have a bit of a handle on the full set, what heroes we're looking at, what decks we're looking at, what we think the format might shake out like. It is important to remember in terms of where we are right now, Tales of Aria, we do have a bit of a limited season before we get into national season. So there is a bit of a break in terms of, I guess, focus on Constructed. I do believe that there's a possibility that we might get another skirmish season. I don't have any sources for that. I just feel like based on what we had this year that we could have a skirmish season into early next year post the national season as well. So Blitz might come back onto the radar once we get through the limited and national season.
Okay, so I'm going slightly off topic here, but I do just want to get your thoughts immediately, Hayden. What do you think about, don't give me something long-winded. Would you be excited for another Blitz-focused season format, or putting a more competitive emphasis on Blitz, or would you be happy to just kind of live in the realm of limited and classic constructed?
Yeah, I'd love if the skirmish season was focused. The next skirmish season focused on limited.
Okay, for sure. All right, to the main topic of the pod.
All right, moving into the main topic this week. Something a little bit more unique, a bit different this week, Brennan. Instead of one of our class deep dives or one of our level ups or a specific focus on one topic in Flesh and Blood, we've got a couple of things to discuss, but it all does stem from the Road to National season that we've just lived through. Past 6 weeks have been Road to Nationals. We've obviously got the Vegas calling this weekend, which is going to close out the Monarch Constructed season, but then we've got other upcoming callings as well. And we're going to see what Tales looks like and what it's going to bring to change up the classic constructed format, especially as we head towards Road to Nationals, which is going to be end of October, November into December. So first of all, I want to start with looking at the data for Road to Nationals. We spoke about the data for Road to Nationals after week 2, and
week 1, I believe, right? We did a week 1 recap, I think, of Road to Nationals.
Yeah, we had Dave on week 1, and then week 2 we looked at some data as well. So 6 weeks now down. Over 156 events that we've had. I wanted to talk about what some of these numbers have actually shown us, and there's been some changes as well. Like it's not been a very linear season. Although if you look at the data, it does feel like if you look at it top level that it's just been quite a linear season. Certain heroes have done well, others haven't. But there's been some shifts as we've gone through. So first place I want to talk about, Brendan, is wins by hero. So everyone kind of knows that Chain's been pretty dominant this season. That's 59 wins of the 156 events that have been recorded. Again, want to give a shout out to Tower Number 9, Davis Kingsley, for all the work he's done in putting this sheet together, this results tracker. You can go check that out as well. I think he's got a link on Discord. If not, we'll actually pop a link in the description as well, so you can go and have a look at the data yourself if you want to. But wins by hero. So 59 wins for Chain, that's 38%. So the interesting thing is that Chain actually had not a great first week in this Road to Nationals format. It was a slower start, but really from week 2 to 6, Chain has been the dominant deck, right, Brendan?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this, the quick takeaway I have is mostly just shoring up the fatigue matchup, sort of on the aggregate. But yeah, I mean, Chain did seem to have a slow start. I think that actually, I don't know if it's represented in the data, but the kind of week 3-ish time seemed like people were actually hopping off of Chain. This was week 3 was like when we heard a lot of like hype around Snag and Dash and things like this. But obviously, he kind of came in and he closed out the season pretty nice as well.
Yeah, definitely. If you look at second in terms of win share, Katsu at 16%. It's a really big drop off in terms of where the second place sits in terms of wins, and it was a lot closer, to be fair, right? As we went through, like you say, weeks 1 to 3 especially, Chain, Katsu, and Bravo were actually pretty reasonably close, especially through week 1 and 2 for win share. But
True.
yeah, but Chain pulled away, and Katsu as well, especially dropped back. I mean, Katsu week 1 had the most wins as well. But so sitting at 25 wins, 16%. Really, the last sort of 3 weeks for Katsu, and we'll look at that in some of the. I've also got some weeks 5 and 6 specific numbers. You'll just see how tough Katsu seemed to find it. Any thoughts on why that might have been? Why Katsu seemed to drop off?
Absolutely. Katsu is the most interesting hero in my opinion, in terms of evolution and Road to Nationals, right? So we initially saw people on the Katsu control deck, little air quotes over control because it's kind of mid range as well.
Mid-range, yeah.
Which was, in my opinion, a very weak deck for the format, but saw a lot of success because it was fatiguing out Chains who weren't prepared to win a fatigue matchup. And it's a Katsu deck, it's a mid-range deck, it can kind of catch some other ones off guard. So it saw a lot of success, even though I know it's funny because when it was seeing its most success, I think we were preaching that we're like, don't play this deck, it's so bad. And then it obviously, I don't know how many people stayed on that versus how many people swapped over to Aggro Ninja, which is almost universally kind of the one I see played more now. Could be region based as well. But it was interesting to see Hero come in almost universally in one archetype and then exit almost universally again in a completely different archetype.
Yeah, I mean, there's still mid-range, and
for sure, there's still a bit floating around. But,
yeah, the true control, I think, is really dropped off. I mean, we're seeing a lot less decks that are playing things like Nourishing Emptiness now, which is good because there's no place for that card in that deck, to be honest. But what I did see, and I think is really impressed me, I think, was players who had moved to a bit more of a mid-range list and had a really clear plan against what they wanted to against like decks like Chain, for instance, or decks where maybe their matchups were a bit harder, which was that they flexed their style in terms of maybe change the game plan up either during the game, or they had a really clear plan going in and what that meant for the card choices. And they didn't just have these cards that, oh, well, this card blocks well, so it's in my deck, or this card can exert a bit of pressure, so it's in my deck. We moved to a lot more cohesive builds, which I think is so important. But what we did see was a big drop off of just the Katsu players in general. Just the amount of Katsu showing up. I think some of the players who had done well on Katsu initially in the first few weeks moved across to different heroes. And I think just in terms of the format became a bit more hostile for some of those decks as well. The format became a bit more. There was a lot more decks showing up. We're going to talk about it soon, but Dorinthia showed up in a big way in the last 2 weeks, which is it's pretty difficult for Katsu aggro decks traditionally. So I think the timing on when we saw the shift might have hurt Katsu a little bit. I think if we'd seen the shift to aggro sort of week 2, that might have benefited them a bit more. But
yeah, I think that this is funny because this is actually, I think my worst kind of beat in the season was that week I decided to play Bravo. After Dash had literally, Dash went from about, very, very low percentage to actually being reasonably high. And I remember that week I showed up and everybody was on Dash and there was no aggro Katsus. This is at like a almost 70 player event. I was like, oh, what the heck? It was like the perfect week for aggro Katsu and everybody had swapped over to Dash.
Yeah. Looking at third, so we have a tie for third, Brendan, which might surprise you. You might, based on the season, who would you?
Not surprised.
Okay, all right. Well, then I won't ask. But it might surprise some that we have a tie for third in terms of win shares. That's Bolton and Bravo coming in at 17 wins each, which is 11%. Bravo really strong stars we'd already mentioned, but quite a poor finish actually, and we'll dive into the week 5 and 6 data. But Bolton, on the other hand, was kind of the opposite story, right? Week 2, we sort of started talking about Bolton a bit more. We knew that, especially in Europe, we're starting to see some results. Week 3, same sort of thing. But then week 4 in particular, a very good week for Bolton, and just really closed out the season. To the point that it feels like Bolton is a deck that's going to show up to the last weekend of Monarch Constructed, Vegas, in a pretty reasonable way.
Oh my god, I'm gonna throw my bet in now. That's gonna be the second most represented deck, which is maybe not surprising in today's current news, as we've seen Bolton win a lot, and it's it's popular, I guess, in the talk of the people. But if we look at the data, that's something. If you just looked at raw statistics of the the Road to Nationals season, you would not expect Bolton to be a very, very popular deck. But I think nowadays, like, people really think that Bolton is kind of that silver bullet. It is that dark horse. I think that it's a little bit too adopted to be a dark horse, but yeah, it's going to be on that. I think that tons of Bolton at Vegas.
Yep, I think we definitely will see it. So, Bolton, Bravo, yeah, interesting that Bravo probably, you could even say now, could very well drop back to maybe not even being in the top 5 most played heroes at the event. You can see Cuts obviously be more represented. We might even see things like Dorinthia or Dash more represented. So yeah, I think if you're sitting in the last week and you're doing some testing, or maybe you're just thinking about, maybe you're not even going to Vegas, but you're just thinking about what the close to Monarch might be, just for fun. I don't know if people do that. You could very well be putting bets on now that the format has a bit of a shake up in terms of representation, and that we see, Bravo, for instance, drop away in favor of other decks. So yeah, interesting to see. In terms of 5th, Brennan, I want to now ask you: Do you know what came in 5th?
So we are talking about wins, so we need to preface it with that, because my kind of knee-jerk reaction would be Prism. Where's the Prism, right? We're talking about wins. I saw Prism all the time. Prism was such a popular deck, and there's some just die-hard Prism players. But she doesn't show up in the wins, does she?
No. 5th goes to Dorinthia, which probably might surprise some people. 13 wins, 8% share, so not far behind Bolton and Bravo, actually. Beating out Prism, beating out Dash, beating out even Reiner, who had a pretty good couple of weeks there. But actually, Reiner not far behind, interestingly. Dorinthia with 13 wins, 8%. Very interesting. Basically, when I talk about a classic hero, I think Dorinthia is the classic hero. The epitome of what I think Flesh and Blood early looked like. Dorinthia was the most popular hero in Welcome to Wraith. That's really lived on through a lot of people who maybe played the game since then, but also people just picking up the game for the first time, I think, drawn to Dawnblade and the interaction of Reprise and how that works. And yeah, we saw Dorinthia, we'll talk about it soon, but Dorinthia had a pretty good conversion rate as well. Events that Dorinthia was doing well in, Dorinthia was doing well in. So I think a big part of that, personally, is just that Dorinthia is not... I take for granted... Sorry, I'm sidetracking a little bit, but I take for granted that people know how to block against Dorinthia, because to me, that hero has been around since the start of the game. So I've played against that hero a lot, but for a lot of players who maybe come into Flesh and Blood this year, Dorinthia is newer to them. If we look at even the Crucible meta, Dorinthia was reasonably big, but that was really dominated by Dash. If we look at since the start of Monarch Constructed, Dorinthia hasn't really showed up. People, if you're a Monarch baby, right, in terms of Flesh and Blood talk, in terms of playing this game, Dorinthia's probably been quite off your radar, and it's very likely that people haven't had the experience of blocking into Reprise and learning how to play those kind of patterns of the game. So it doesn't surprise me that Dorinthia has done well when it's done well.
My favorite anecdote of Dorinthia is Skirmish Season 1 and 2. Skirmish Season 1 was dominated by Dorinthia, so much Dorinthia. And then Season 2 totally fell off. Obviously, people saw Husk as kind of bad for it, but Chain was actually not really played, and Dorinthia just totally fell off. Mostly because I assume people kind of learned, figured out how to block against it, and had a bit of a harder time maybe against some of the new heroes. But yeah, we've seen that kind of consistently in formats. It's very young, kind of newer formats have a lot of Dorinthia, and then it starts to fade off.
Yeah, and Dorinthia had a pretty solid last 2 weeks, and I think a big part of that is, your deaf and Prism had a really tough time, and I think people, the win rate of Prism, it was so poor that I think people just kind of walked away from Prism for a lot of players and moved towards other decks, and that allowed Dorinthia to come back, because it is traditionally a bit of a tough matchup for Dorinthia into Prism. So I'm not surprised that we saw.
I think that matchup is very hard. That one's brutal. That's, for me, that was in my experience of playing Monarch, that was my least favorite one to play, was to play the Dorinthia side of Dorinthia versus Prism. Just absolutely worse than Bravo versus Mech, believe it or not.
Yeah. And the last thing I did just want to say on that, I mean, if we are talking, so that's our top 5, of course. If we look at some of the other heroes there, we did speak about Prism. I mean, 5% of the win share, 8 wins total. Really, only slightly more than Reiner at 3% of the win share. So, if you look at the amount of played, what heroes played the most, Prism far outstrips Reiner in terms of, I think it's about over 3 times more played in terms of events where we have total data from the meta breakdown. So, to win just less than double the events, but well over 3 times the amount of players, kind of shows you that, Reiner, for instance, was a better choice for a lot of players. I want to talk about top eights as well, top eight percentage. So this is quite closely tied to the win percentage, but do just want to rattle this off. There's a bit of a difference, and we'll talk about it. So Chain had 31% share of the total top eights. Katsu 17%. Prism does feature here. 11% of total top eights came from Prism. Bravo 10%, Bolton 10%. So we see Dorinthia falling out of that 5 and Prism sneak its way into third. Kind of shows you the conversion rate though, doesn't it, Brendan?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there's only one hero in this list that actually has, converts worse actually in the finals, and that looks like it's just Prism. Katsu's above, Chain's above, all that good stuff. So it's pretty interesting. I think Prism was kind of one of the more unique stories of the Road to National season, one of the most popular decks in the beginning, and although it took bad beats, stayed pretty popular throughout the season.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I actually think that Prism has a pretty solid plan. I think one of the things that we've seen change is these Prism decks have moved away from, initially it was like Herald, I don't want to say, people say Herald high roll. I disagree with this so strongly. I think that the Herald aggro decks actually have a pretty good place in the meta. And I was really surprised, like people moved away from these decks to a lot more like aura-based decks. People like playing what they're calling like a tank Prism, which I don't fully understand the implications of why they call it that, but this more, I guess, like mid-rangey defensive, like play auras, find value, prismatic shields build, which kind of stumped me in a meta that was so dominated by Chain, right? And even Katsu, like it felt like if I was playing Katsu, I'd prefer to play into that than like those classic Herald versions, because Heralds are just so hard to stop as Katsu.
For sure.
Yeah.
Like you said, like Herald high roll. I had never heard that before, so it made me chuckle. Yeah, I mean, you don't want to see that as Katsu. That is an abysmal match.
Yeah.
And then as Chain, like, I mean, I played a lot of Prisms of the season, and I was always very worried to run into Herald aggro or Herald high roll, whatever you want to call it.
It's called Herald aggro. I just heard that somewhere. I'm not trying to perpetrate.
It's funny. It rolls off the tongue very nice. But yeah, I mean, I was way more worried to run into an aggressive Herald deck because I felt like I think that the Chain deck was way more tech to deal with it, especially if you pack Ninth Blades. But I packed Ninth Blades the entire season. Keep in mind, Prism was one of the worst converting heroes, kind of one of the worst performing heroes. I still devoted a significant portion of my sideboard cards to deal with this hero because the Herald aggro matchup was so uncomfortable. Like it always felt like it always felt like it was slightly out of your control, and there was just sequences that you could always just lose.
Yep. I completely agree. Like I think we have someone in our testing team who thinks it's like so favorable to Chain that it's ridiculous. I actually think through testing that Prism can win that matchup and it not be that far off, to be honest. It only takes like 1 or 2 good turns. Your deck is so consistent with the power. Wartune Herald is like, honestly, I think one of the strongest heralds, if not the strongest herald. Like the fact that one read is also so important. At least you do so many things with the deck. Yeah, really, really surprised to see this move away, and I think that hurt Prism massively. I think that those lists, while it won some events and it top-aided some events, and I think we saw some recaps and some people on those decks be pretty vocal, or be maybe in the community. I think if you look at the results overall for that deck and where people shifted to, it hurt it even more than maybe week 1 and 2, which already was a bit tough. So yeah, I mean, we did see some really good players put up some results on Herald aggro. Don't get me wrong, but they were definitely in the very small minority.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, everything else pretty standard there. Did want to talk about as well conversion in our full event data. So where we had the full breakdown of events, which was actually a majority of events at the end. And again, shout out to Tower number 9, who really worked to get as much of meta breakdowns as he could to the point where majority of events then had full meta data for us to look at, which is really helpful when we're looking at sample sizes. We'll probably just talk about what's different here in terms of from our win share and top 8 share. But this is, again, full events, so where we have full total data. This is basically what percentage of total players in the event converted. So this is conversion data. So Chain, 30% of players top 8'd with Chain in events, 5% win share. So you show up with Chain. I mean, it's a bit simplistic, but you had 30% chance to make top 8, right? And as how you'd read that, obviously that's not the case. It obviously comes down to play skill and builds and things like that. But Chain had the best conversion into top 8 from Swiss, and the best conversion from entry into Swiss into winning at 5%. Bolton, 23%, had the second highest win conversion rate at 3%, and the third highest top 8 percentage at 23%. Katsu had 24% of conversions to top 8. So Bolton and Katsu really close in terms of players entering and heading into top 8. And Bolton with more, win conversion, higher win conversion than Katsu at 2%. So Katsu actually had one of the lower, equal with Bravo at 2% as well, win conversion. Bravo had a 20% top 8 conversion, so Swiss into top 8. That's actually the same as Dorinthia Dorinthia slightly less at 19%, but Dorinthia again had a 4% conversion. So Dorinthias were top 8ing and they were winning. They were going the distance as they were with Bolton to an extent. So if I just make this a bit more simplistic, our win shares, our win conversion, so Chain was 5%, Dorinthia was 4%, Bolton was 3%, Rhino was 3%, and then Katsu and Bravo 2%, and Prism all the way down to 1%. In terms of conversion into top 8s from Swiss, Chain at 30%, Katsu at 24%, Bolton at 23%, then Bravo and Dory, and Prism was actually 17%.
Yeah, I want to talk about this coming to an event with 5% to win as Chain, which obviously I know is just a joke, but I think that what's cool about the Chain deck is that it was highly represented in event wins, but it was also highly represented in very significant event losses. So like if you were at an event, you would usually see Chain at the top tables, but if you walk down to those bottom tables, there's a bunch of Chain down there.
Yeah.
I think with Chain, like a lot of the consistency and sort of Chain wins over the season was a lot of the kind of the same players winning events on that deck, kind of multiple times. So seems like the players, but yeah, I mean,
this is like a bias
that
view
was
there,
a cool.
Brendan.
I guess I was like, duh, man, am I? No, but there's definitely multiple people I know that won multiple events on Chain. Specifically, I mean, we literally played with one guy, Dante, won 2 of them. But I remember walking around events like these 50 plus players, and I would see a lot of Chain at table, the top tables, but you go down to the bottom, there's plenty down there as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, definitely. And you see in terms of the other thing as well, you've got to consider in these numbers is that Chain players are knocking out Chain players, right? Like, so when people go, oh, the conversion rate of Chain is not maybe as high as we expected, man, you remember that these Chain players, because of the prevalence of Chain, are knocking out Chain players, or these Bolton players are knocking out Bolton players in these top 8s, because Bolton had a very good last 2 weeks. Top 8 into win conversion for the total events. So this is just making top 8 into wins. Just want to talk about these quickly because there's actually some really interesting conversion once you get into top 8 into a win for all 156 events that we have data for. Chain at 16%, Bolton at 15%, Rhino at 14%, so that's where Rhino's really poking its head up, Bravo at 14%, and Dorinthia at 13%. Poor wee Prism all the way down at 6% is one of the lowest, as we talked about. Only Levia and Azalea with no wins have a lower conversion rate.
Yeah, the Prism lack of conversion in the top 8 was sort of a narrative that we were on pretty early with some of the data in week 1 and 2. We saw that pretty quickly that Prisms would make top 8, but then rarely convert for the win.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and I guess just tying this all together, Brendan, like what's our point? What's my point? What am I trying to say? I think the things we can take away from this is that yes, Chain was dominant like we thought. Bolton had a meteoric rise, whether that be Sabres or Raiden, but Sabres in particular had a really strong last couple of weeks. Katsu's mediocrity was a bit of a takeaway from me. Really middle of the pack. Katsu had a very strong first week, looked very promising coming off the back of the PTI in Auckland with the win there, off the back of the charity win. There's a bit of hype around Katsu, really dropped off after week 2. Bravo was consistent, but not amazing, but a very solid pick, and it seemed to do one of the decks that did pretty consistent across every event in every region. Bravo was pretty consistently up top 8s. Another takeaway for me, how bad Prism was in this event. In this season, we already talked about it. And not to say that Prism is the incorrect choice for going into an event. I think if you have the right list and you have the right game plan, it does well. But overall, Prism had a really tough time. And the last one for me, Brendan, is just the surprise of Rhinar and Dorinthia. Dorinthia had performed better than Katsu overall, which is, crazy to think. If we look back at week 1 and week 2, you wouldn't think that Dorinthia was going to outperform Katsu. And, Rhinar, a real surprise there. The players that played Rhinar in general, and did very well. There was, a reasonable number of wins there. There was some really strong top 8 performances. Rhinar, I think definitely a hero that was written off heading into this format because of, perceived pretty poor matchup into Chain. Actually ended up doing, reasonably well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I want to talk about Rhino and Dorinthia because what do you think that led to that? Was it people just kind of trying to play the meta in the beginning, and then like the kind of latter weeks just ended up being like, I'm just going to play the hero that I want, play the hero that I like, ended up performing well with some of these less represented heroes throughout in the season. But towards the end, they were picking up some wins.
I think that's one of the biggest reasons. I think that, we have brute players, we have warrior players. I think these players just stuck with their heroes and did well with them. I think that's one of the things we talk about with Flesh and Blood, right? If you know your class, you know your heroes, you know them well, you can do well no matter the meta. I think that's very true if you build the right deck towards it. The other thing as well is that I think as we went through the season, I think we saw some, I guess, divergences and plans that people were playing. So, it was really like week 1, week 2, even to week 3 was like really dominated by the aggressive deck and the control deck. And that was like, okay, I'm going to control this game and I'm going to be aggressive in this game. I'm going to try and fatigue this person. I'm going to try and beat them before we get to that point, whatever it might be. And we really saw a divergence from that in the past 3 weeks as people learned more about the meta. People started to have a bit more, have less linear game plans, start to think about it more holistically. And I think these heroes just, both of them can actually do really well into that, especially if they've got builds that are tweaked for the meta.
Yeah, I actually think, funny enough, I think that's a big takeaway for if you're going to be competing in Vegas, is that there will be a significant amount of players that will just be playing what they're comfortable on. More than I actually would have expected, more than I would expect if I was going into like week 1 of a road to nationals. I think people will be trying to game the meta a little bit more. Whereas with Vegas, I know that we kind of made some edits to our chain deck specifically because of this, because we think that people will be playing heroes I think are fun, dark horse heroes, and all kinds of funky stuff, and you need to be prepared for that. Whereas with Road to Nationals, it feels like you can kind of more predict the meta before you go in, or at least you can try to. Vegas, I expect to see a lot more Dorinthias, a lot more Reinars, some Kanos, all that good stuff.
Yeah, just a lot more players. It's a wider player base. You get the outliers actually show up, because in smaller events, maybe you might get one in one event, but for 2 or 3 events after that, you might not get the outliers. So, yeah, I think that's definitely true and something that we've talked about. We'll move on, Brennan, and pace this through a bit more in terms of just talking about our general thoughts on the Road to National season. So, just want to start. Any comments on the structure? 6 weeks, of course. We had recaps most weeks, which was really good to tie that up. Obviously, one of the things that I think worked really well wasn't actually, of course, not an official thing, but Tower collating this data has really given us a snapshot of the meta. I think if no one was doing this, we would have been working off anecdotal evidence only, which I think would actually paint a pretty different picture of the format, I think.
100%. Yeah, 100%. I totally agree with you. The data has given us so much clarity, and it's one of my favorite parts about the season is actually having the data. So huge shout out to Tower number 9. Thank you so much for doing that. But if we don't talk about the season, so 6 weeks of events, I thought it was awesome. I had a great time. It actually didn't end up feeling like that much of a grind in the end. And if I could play 2 events per weekend, I would have been doing it. But usually I was just playing 1, especially on the weekends I traveled. I think what I'm most excited for next season is to maybe have more events that are more local, right? So as the game gets bigger and as more stores pick up the game, maybe I'll just kind of have more events in my local area. So that's going to be super exciting. But I really like traveling. I really liked going to all these events. I think it was awesome finally meeting all these people, because we talked about this in some of our podcasts as well. If you played Flesh and Blood during skirmish season, or even kind of Crucible and some of Monarch, like you met a lot of people online, whether it was through the Discord or you played online armories or you played online skirmishes. And Road to Nationals was kind of the first time we got to finally meet all those people, and that was an awesome experience. Like finally, kind of some of these people I'd talked to for months or even years, just finally seeing them in person, playing against them. I thought it was great.
Yep. Yeah, no, I think the structure of the 6 weeks works really well. You have enough time to shift through a bit of a meta change, but not so long that we're sort of having a bit of a drag out of events. Of course, we move into a calling season and then international, so it felt right to me. I think 6 weeks feels pretty good. I mean, in the future, it might be more like 8 weeks. This obviously there was a lot of things that LSS have that they've had to change dates on, had to change, I guess, their planning path on just due to global events. But I think moving forward, maybe they're going to be able to not do that, and we might have some, maybe 8 weeks sort of thing. We'll have a bit more of a path in terms of what seasons look like. We'll be moving a bit more seamlessly through certain seasons, whether that be limited seasons into constructed seasons into blitz seasons, whatever it might be. So yeah, excited about that. I was really excited as well, Brendan, about just the regions we saw grow out of this. I think we've really seen a growth of Europe through this time as well, especially in places like Poland, in the Netherlands. We've seen some really good growth from the European Flesh and Blood countries, both from just in terms of the game actually growing there with the player base, but also the results as well. Some of the players that we've seen come out of those regions.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that this has happened a few times through Flesh and Blood, but to see these new regions get picked up, where in Skirmish it was sort of Hong Kong, that was like a big one that exploded onto the scene in season 2. In season 1, it was Singapore, and now with Road to Nationals, I think sort of our marquee like big growth area has been Europe, and it's been awesome to see some MTG pros coming over and seeing success in events was really cool. And then also, like you mentioned, Poland and the Netherlands, but also got to mention the United Kingdom as well. They have a pretty cool scene over there, and I think that they're finally able to play their first kind of big premier events, if you could call Road to Nationals that. So I think that was really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny. This time next year, you won't call them that, but I think 3-4 months ago we were calling skirmishes premier events. So
Yeah.
it's an evolution as we go through. Effectively a skirmish is a game day. If you've ever played Magic, like it's a local store event, right? And I mean, I traveled to skirmishes in season 1 because there was Flesh and Blood events to play, and there hadn't been Flesh and Blood events for well over a year. So I went and played in 3 different cities, different skirmishes, just to experience playing some Flesh and Blood and the Flesh and Blood, and meeting some players from my country's community and things like that. So in the future, I definitely won't be traveling for skirmishes, but I'll be traveling for callings, for Pro Tours, for whatever it is, and that's just the evolution of the game, right? Which is awesome to see. In terms of, I just wanted to maybe mention some of the I guess the takeaways from a metagame perspective, some of the things that we liked or we think were, I guess, really good shifts and expect to see into Vegas as well. We already talked about Saber Bolton, obviously Brendan's one true love. What that means for heading into Vegas, we both think that we're going to see that deck played reasonably prominently, as well as I do think we'll see Raiden builds show up, or hybrid builds as well. I actually like the hybrid builds. I know that people have an issue with that just because of trying to fit the cards into it. I think you can do it if you know what decks you're trying to target.
You're laughing at my notes, and I know you're just reading for the first time. Yeah, I put Brendan loves Saber Bolton. It's what Flesh and Blood should be. So yeah, Saber Bolton it's definitely going to be a serious story in the end of Monarch, almost to the point where we're beating a dead horse talking about it. But yeah, that deck is really popular. You got to be prepared for it, and a lot of people don't know how the combo works, and I think that's like a huge advantage for the deck. So Bolton seeing tons of success. I like the hybrid build. I think that it's actually like the hybrid build really shores up like your matchups against like Bravo and other stuff that just kind of slaps you if you're not ready for it. So I think that that's really cool, being able to adapt and like play like a a more real deck, and just straight sabers. It's a dark horse. I'm worried about it. I'm worried about Saber Bolton.
Yeah, I mean the deck can just. I mean, I think I didn't share this on the pod, but in my Saturday Road to National, so the one that I ended up coming 9th and missing the top 8 on breakers, I lost my last round, which was my winning into a turn 4 triple Lumina turn. My opponent just had the triple Lumina Ascension, and I got whacked for 8 hits with the sabers. So it's it can definitely happen. It's one of those decks that can beat anything on its day, because it can just have the draws that it needs. But I think, like to your point, bringing in the Raiden can shore up some matchups that may be a bit more difficult.
Yeah, this is about the time I would start giving you some tips on how to pitch your deck and reach your second cycle, because obviously that's where you're making mistakes. I do want to talk about my favorite narrative, or my favorite part in sort of like deck evolution, or deck perception evolution, actually, in Road to Nationals, and that was actually Chain. It was really interesting. The Chain deck and the Chain strategy stayed pretty consistent throughout the season, but we saw, people thought initially that it auto lost to control, and then people thought that it auto lost to control plus snag, and then obviously we've sort of landed in this middle ground where it's like, yeah, it can have a hard time versus those decks, but it definitely could win, and we see most of people opting to actually not fatigue the deck at this point. That was probably for me one of the most interesting things to see the different takes on how people would attack Chain and what they thought was effective versus it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, definitely. I think it's we're closing out the season. We're coming into Tales of Aria. Tales of Aria is definitely going to shake things up. So I think it's been. I think for people, 6 weeks ended up being the right amount of time to move through this current format, which is it's good. In terms of other sort of takeaways from me, I was happy with the results that our team was able to put up as well. I think we 7 wins in total, 10 top 8s across the 4 from the team, which was a really great result. The deck, I think we've talked about the deck that we've played, hasn't changed too much through the season. There's been a few sort of iterations and things like that, and there'll be another iteration going into Vegas. But yeah, I'm ready for other decks to play in Tales of Aria. had other decks that I've brought to, I guess, our testing team that just haven't quite made the grade. So I'm excited to have those maybe make the cut when we come to Tales of Aria Class Constructed.
For sure. And just want to talk about it's kind of hard to ask you, Hayden, because I know your season got cut a little bit short, which wasn't anybody's fault. Unfortunately, COVID did play a factor. So if we're looking forward to next season, what are some things that we would like to see changed or done differently? For me, this is kind of my classic complaint, which is actually not a complaint with Flesh and Blood organized play, and that it's that as the scene grows, like we will have more events to play in, they'll be less exclusive, and for me that's exactly what I want. Like I want events to be more available and kind of less this sort of you have to sign up immediately and try to get in, and like it's always this rush. But that is 100% a subject of us, the game being way too fun, way too good, and the supply just kind of outstripping the demand. So I look forward to the day when these things are more accessible and they're kind of more casual. But other than that, I thought everything went fantastic. I totally enjoyed the season. I thought it was run really well. What about you, Hayden?
Yeah, I loved watching it from from a distance and seeing what was happening. I think if I thought about things that I would love to maybe see some changes next time, I do actually think that a slightly longer season would allow for a couple of things. It would allow for players to maybe get to more events if they wanted to, which I think is perfectly reasonable. I wouldn't go too long so that they could space out events, and players are just spending 10 weeks or 12 weeks playing events or feel like they have to. But 8 weeks maybe feels a bit more reasonable. It also allows stores in certain areas, so maybe larger states or larger territories, to just coordinate the events a bit better in terms of saw in multiple places where stores were really close together. Unfortunately, have to end up running their events on the same day or the same weekend because they couldn't get around it. Basically, they couldn't avoid it. Just gives them a few more opportunities. I think as well would just let us have a bit more breathing room with the meta. I think if we had 2 more weeks here, I think we'd see another slight shift in the meta, which I would hope that in future metas we start to see a bit more shifts anyway as the card pool grows. I think as we move through Class Constructed with more cards coming in, we've talked about this before, and I don't want to dwell on it too much, but just the fact that Monarch was the first of, I guess, the more powered sets, I guess the full realization of what Flesh and Blood is, that Monarch had more impact on the format than any other set. But as we move through in these sets that come out at the full realization of what Flesh and Blood is, that will be less, each set will have less impact, I guess, is my thought. But we'll have to see.
Awesome.
I'll move lastly to wrap up the show, Brendan, and talk about Class Constructed and what it looks like moving forward with Tales of Aria. Of course, Vegas calling next, and then we have a short break, limited season, then we're into Nationals, which is Class Constructed again with Tales of Aria. That's about 4-week season for the majority. I want to talk about a few things that I think we might see, and just any of your thoughts as well, Brendan. But I think that we... very likely, New Zealand and US Nationals are the first 2 Nationals that come up. So they're the second to last weekend and the last weekend in October. And my kind of thought is that there's a reason that LSS have done this. And I think that's that they expect that those 2 regions will have the most innovation in terms of all the most, the most decks come out of the format, out of those regions. And then allow other regions to, I guess, have a bit of a blueprint to go from, which rightly or wrongly, I think does make sense in terms of if they want to try and bring, the heroes into the game that maybe new Tales or different decks into the spotlight, and then see the meta start to develop from there. If you think about how in other card games, it tends to be like the Pro Tour or something, and then the format starts to filter through like GPs or through callings from there. So I think that's why we're gonna see US and New Zealand Nationals first. And do you think it'll dictate the meta?
Do I think that New Zealand and U.S. Nationals will dictate the meta? Probably, just because it's such a marquee event. It'll be so big and it's just so many eyes on it. But it's hard to tell. It's weird because if we're looking at Monarch, I think that the Monarch meta that we participated in seemed like it kind of stayed pretty similar, even though we saw a lot of changes on heroes outside of Chain. But I expect that Flesh and Blood will become more of a rock, paper, scissors-esque format as more heroes are added to the card pool. And that is why I think that we'll have kind of a more diverse format moving forward. Is that it's just like as more heroes get implemented and even more archetypes, which is what we're seeing, there's more archetypes getting implemented. It's really hard to create a single deck that it just has good matchups into everything, right? And that leads to kind of very diverse and rotating formats is when you do have a couple bad matchups.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, I guess this is a bit of a question on everyone's lips and something that we've talked about, will Tales slow the format? Will it bring more complexity? Will it involve a bit more dynamic game plans as opposed to a format that's been a bit more dominated by linear and proactive game plans?
So I think that my views are pretty extreme on this in the sense that I think like 100% yes. Like we can just take the sort of boogeyman of the format and the person that's being targeted with that question, which is chain. The chain deck. So this is my opinion. The chain deck in its current iteration, the way it's built, the way it plays, functionally won't exist when Tales of Aria comes out. And this is going to affect all aggro decks and all kind of linear, just ultra proactive game plans. The idea of taxes and hand disruption is just so devastating for those decks that I think they're going to have to change how they're fundamentally built and also how they fundamentally play to even exist in the future meta. So my answer is in kind of an overwhelming yes.
Yeah, my perspective is I think that's a bit oversimplified. I think because I think you'll start to see evolutions in the meta. Like you'll find there'll be a deck that beats, like you say, rock paper scissors, right? There'll be a deck that beats these more taxing decks. So then, what is the answer to that? Is it an aggressive deck? Like, do we see these aggressive decks actually exist in the same format they are now? They just be less effective into a wider meta, for instance. That's where my head's at, but we'll have to see. One of these things, and this is kind of a theory that for me is really starting to, I guess, percolate now, and is something that I know we've talked about, Brendan, actually since Monarch came out. Like this has been something that we've spoken heavily about, is that Monarch introduced more variants into Classic Constructed. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One of them was that the game became shorter in this format. So we saw a lot more, like we said, linear game plans, a lot less of the deck cycle mattering. But I think even as we move into Tales of Aria and potentially, like we said, the game slowing down, second cycle of the deck being more important, we're still, I think what we're seeing with after the base sets, so after Welcome to Wraith and Arcane Rising, what we're seeing with Monarch, Tales of Aria, and as we move through, in my eyes, is a balancing of the power level with variance. So I think we're starting to see some more variance come into the game, but that's traded off with the power level that it's bringing. And do you think, Brendan, that, first of all, do you agree? And then do you think we're going to see this move forward?
So I agree in a sort of yes and no kind of way. I remember in the early days of Monarch, and we said this a few times, we kind of stayed on the same deck that we've been since the early days of Monarch. In my perception of the game back then, I was pretty frustrated with the variance for a while. I was very concerned about the Classic Constructed format, all this kind of stuff. As we progressed in the season, that definitely lessened to a very significant amount because although variance was introduced, the set was still very mechanically complex, and you still had to use a lot of play skill to win very consistently. And that allowed me to kind of accept the variance, embrace it, and still just try to play my best. And I think that, if your knee-jerk reaction to Monarch is like, some kind of a joke you see sometimes, is Mon Casino or Mon Variance, it's probably a bit misguided. Yeah, for sure, right? So it's probably a bit misguided. Like there is variance, but variance is probably not the reason why you're not winning, right? So while it was introduced, I think that it was manageable, and we still had a very fun and complicated format outside of that.
Yeah, no.
What was the second question?
I mean, that was I was just, do we see this moving forward? Like, do we see this trade-off of power for a bit more variance moving forward?
I'm not sure. So just looking at Arya, it really looks like it's putting all of this stuff into check. And yeah, I think we're going to be going back to seeing the second cycle of our deck. We're going to be going back to playing longer games. Maybe it's not saying that there's not going to be any aggro decks. There's not going to be any proactive decks or combo and non-interactive decks. There will be. But right now, I don't think there's like a premier deck that just punishes aggro decks heavily, which if like you look at the Frost talent system or Ice talent system, it 100% does.
Yeah. I mean, I think my kind of overall view, as I said, is that with the introduction of the fully realized game mechanics of Flesh and Blood, it does feel like it does introduce a little more variance, but I don't think that means that I don't think we're going to get more variance introduced as we move through. And what it is actually about, in my eyes, is how you control the variance. So, for instance, getting through the second cycle of your deck is one of the best ways that you can control variance. You can control your draws. You look at a hero like Levia, where you go, wow, like it all comes down to your banishes and what happens there. But the deck building aspects and the way that you control the first and second cycles of your deck is how you, and your use of a card like Scabskin Leathers is how you control your variants. And I actually think that's a big part of what Flesh and Blood is about, is mitigating or controlling some of the more aspects, or some of the aspects that have more variance about them in order to construct your game plan. You talk about that with Chain, for instance. I mean, it all comes down to how good your banishes are, but you can control that. You can work on that. You can supplement the rest of the deck to mitigate those factors. So I honestly think that that's what we're going to have, and not just from the aggressive side like we have now. I think we're going to see that from the defensive side moving forward as well. With things like Fuse. Well, if you don't draw good hands of Fuse, how do you do that? Or if you don't draw these defense reactions or these cards for all time, like how do you? But it's all about the second cycle in that regard. So yeah, I think that if anything, actually, Tails probably gives us more tools to mitigate the trade off because we're probably more likely to get through the second cycle, whereas Monarch had the balance, but didn't have the mitigating factors.
Yeah, I'm happy that I finally get to pay homage to Isaac Olson, who said this in an interview with Sasha Markovic back in like 2019. And this is like, variance has always existed in Flesh and Blood. Just what variance looked like in Welcome to Wraith was like, no, I didn't draw my blues.
Yeah.
Or I didn't draw my Irontongue Determination with my Steelblade Supremacy. Or like I've sat a Supremacy at Arsenal forever and like all my Irontongue Determinations on the bottom of my deck. Or as soon as I got it, my opponent had a pivot turn on me and had to block. Like there's always been variance. Just in Monarch was really when we saw like the second cycle of the deck be, I think, the least relevant it's ever been in the game. And I think that was what kind of like, made us kind of have that's what made us have like the knee-jerk reactions, like variance. But at the end of the day, it's very on par with sort of the variance we've dealt with in this game the entire time, and you want a certain amount of variance in a game, because if there wasn't,
I agree.
it'd be more like chess.
I'd just go play chess. Yeah, exactly. No, I completely agree. And the aspects of the variants as well, like you say, they've just changed what they look like. And again, it's because for some of them, it's a trade off in the power level. Like, some of these cards have a bit more inherent power, but actually the ability to play them in the most efficient way possible has the trade-off. So anyway, I think we spent enough time on it. I'm sure it's something that I think we're going to talk about as Tales of Aria comes out and the constructed season starts to shape up, like where we kind of feel we sit versus Monarch. Last question I want to ask Brendan is, do you feel like we need any changes to Class Constructed? Do we need, people have spoken about bans. Do you like the way Living Legend works? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, I like the way Living Legend works. I think it's a great system. I knew that we were always going to have to update the old system. The old system fundamentally looked like it didn't work. So I'm very happy with the current system that's been implemented. I know that we have talked about in the pod for some concerns of maybe it going too fast, but I trust the system and I will wait and see. And I'm very happy with the update. I think that in regards to bans, I'm going to have to defer this question to you simply because I think with how the season went for me, people might look at my opinion on bans and say, of course he doesn't want it because he saw success with it, which is not the case and it's not true. But I'm going to let you answer that one for me, Hayden.
I don't see any reason to ban cards right now. Look, I think if there was a truly inherently, I guess I don't want to say broken, I hate using that word, but if there was an inherent problem with the design of these cards, like when we saw Drone banned, I think made a lot of sense. I don't, Husk is probably the one that people have said, ban Husk. I just don't think that. I think because there was a best deck in the format, or there was a hero that had a slight domination, and you look at the results, like it had 38% of the wins, but like we saw Bolton, we saw Katsu, we saw these decks that had a 6 to a 5th of win share behind it. So I don't think so. I think I would monitor it and see what happens. I think Tales of Aria is, from what we've seen so far, already gives me confidence that we're going to see this sort of the yin to the yang of what Monarch has brought in terms of the game style, and is really going to balance out a lot of these heroes that we saw in Monarch. So I'm not too concerned about that, to be honest. I like the living.
Didn't have an expansion. Oh, sorry, Angelo, did you?
No, you go.
We didn't have an expansion, let's say for a year. Like, it's not the case of this card game, but like just to say they're like, yeah, no expansion for another year after, like from this point starting out. I think that I don't think banning Husk would like do anything. But the only thing that I see as the power level I see is actually printed on the hero. And that most heroes, that's the way it is. Like the power level is printed on the hero. In Chain is 100% the case. So even if we didn't have another expansion for a year, I actually think that the game's fine. Do I think the Chain would stay dominant? Yes, I do. But Living Legend would totally fix that. Like, it's not a Shadow Runeblade power level thing. It's a Chain power level. it's the go again. So I don't think that anything should be banned. I think that if we were to exist in a format like in a vacuum where there was no, ice coming out or taxes or disruption, chain would probably be dominant, but it would just be living legend, in my opinion.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the living legend status takes care of a lot of. I do think about the system's actually pretty well balanced and is pretty thought through in terms of what was going to happen once they got to the full realization. Again, I'm just going to keep talking about this, the full realization of what Flesh and Blood was. And there's a reason that, these Monarch heroes have probably had more success than others, and it's not just straight down to players' preferences or what players have built. It is, Monarch does have a bit more power to it. So, yeah, not surprised to see it. I like Living Legend. I do have some concerns about the scalability once we get into it. More so on Blitz, to be honest. Because if you look at now, if the game grows in regions by double in the next year in terms of just a store level for things like skirmish, which is very, very likely, could very easily happen as stores reopen, things like that happen. That the Living Legend status for Blitz in particular could be too fast. Could be the same for Class Constructed in the future with the mini callings that we're coming towards, and also just more national champs, things like that. But we'll have to see. I think the change in essence was a very good change. I just have some questions about the scalability of it heading into year 3 and 4. I think that's kind of it. The only thing that I kind of had some questions about was like the tiebreaker system in this game, and I don't want to get into it because it's a very vast topic. But if I was to talk about something that maybe in the future I would look at or consider, would be the tiebreaker system means that the last round is pretty anticlimactic. You can basically always see, you can call the top 8 pretty easily. You can see exactly who's in top 8 actually from before the last round even starts because of the way that the tiebreakers work. In terms of the fact that where you lost your round is important. So the later you lose, and of course losing that last round is the most important. So yeah, I think there could be in the future alternatives to that, but also it does. We don't have draws in this game, obviously.
Yeah, so I can't comment too much because I didn't play competitive card games competitively. Sorry, competitive card games. I didn't play card games competitively before this, but I like the system. Mostly because it disincentivized draws. And I think that's really cool. You're right. It is an anticlimactic top 8. It's climactic if you're bubbling in like 8th or 9th, because you can have the same record as somebody, but your opponents can perform better. So other than that, I like the system currently. It runs very smooth for me, and I'd like to disincentivize draws, but that might be a very unpopular opinion in like the competitive TCG community. Anyway, that's it for episode 22. I do want to shout out a few things for Arsenal Pass. We are on YouTube. We have had a huge emphasis on YouTube recently, and we put everything up on there. We put this podcast up on there, and then we have a special one, YouTube exclusive, called Time in the Round, which is much more informal, just me and Hayden kind of talking out the game and our opinions, as well as gameplay, deck techs, and sometimes the old special video on how to talk about a combo that you're probably going to see at an upcoming event. So check us out on YouTube. Throw a subscription, helps out a lot, and has encouraged us so much to focus on that medium so much more. So Hayden, we always talk about this too. I always laugh when I say this, but the boomers of Welcome to Wraith, Hayden, Dale, and Brendan Patrick have figured out how to use Twitter, and we are on there, and we would love you to follow us, interact with us on there. So I am at the Fiddysays, so at TheFiddysHades. It's very reminiscent name of some very popular literature, so that's the one. And then we have Hayden, who is at Fiendale, FYEN_Dale, so kind of like Toma Fiendal. Lastly, huge shout out to all of our patrons, over 120 patrons so far. It's been amazing seeing all the support, and we just can't thank you guys enough. Our Patreon is all about kind of exclusive next level content, right? So while we do the deck techs on the YouTube channel, we'll go ahead and write out all the sideboard guides, all the ratios, all the math, the deck theory, everything on our Patreon, and do a huge deep dive so you can just pick it up, take it to an event, and be competitive. We also, lastly, like we kind of talked about at the beginning, we are releasing our playmats up on Patreon. So if you're interested in checking that out, you can be subscribed to any tier and it will be available to patrons. So we'll be getting that out next week. But anyway, good luck to everyone who's competing in Vegas and upcoming very, very soon. I think like this goes up on Thursday, so the next day will be the world premiere. I will see you all there. Be sure to say hi. I'll be the dude with the white hair. Pretty easy to spot out. And until next time, we'll see you guys in the next episode.
See you later.